they get tons of ships and they sail across the ocean unmolested and more or less sweep over us and quote, conquer us, mission accomplished, a la George Bush. And they do this in, say, 9 weeks, because we got a good highway system and they can go from coast to coast real easy. Okay, 9 weeks later. Well, now what's been accomplished? They may have 25 million of their citizens packed over here, armed to the teeth, patrolling with guns and stuff.
Yeah.
And all they've done is given us 25 million targets.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.
That's the way the world operates now. Because people, since the times are changing, and these cycles are something the manipulators are aware of. They're attempting to do things before the cycles close windows on them. And I think one was a very stupid attempt to do some kind of an oil grab on the part of some people who are thinking linearly within a cycle, just as all the cycles are closing down. And it's quite true. I do not care if most of the citizenry of the United States, out of that 300 million, I don't care if, say, 250 million are nebbish and never do a thing.
Right.
All I have to say to you is, if the United States government and citizenry can't control the gang problem, I don't expect the Chinese to do so.
Well,
the gang are going to take this as a power vacuum and a good opportunity to go on out and seize turf and territory.
Yeah.
Plus, they're going to be real raspy about someone interfering with their business. The Chinese would not have the ability to occupy us in a safe, non-deteriorating condition that they would consider to be success.
That's an interesting approach, just the gang aspect. If indeed the gangs themselves that we see around us are truly...
Yeah, you think that they're going to put up with the Chinese imposing roadblocks on their drug traffic?
Well,
I don't think so.
If it is a natural, let's say, progression of society and that they are not backed by certain factions of the government to keep a degree of unrest going on all the time. See, I'm just not as trusting, I guess, of the government as you are.
I'm trusting of the government in its predictability.
Okay.
Okay, and of course we have to acknowledge there is layers and layers and layers of government. And some levels become increasingly unpredictable, especially as you get to the politician layer.
Right.
Because they're influenced by things where their boundaries are fewer. But under the circumstances, I still stand by the math. And I have great authority with this. I have Alexander the Great, I have Julius Caesar, I have a whole lot of these great thinkers who are actually did it in their time. That is to say, conquered and held territory.
Yeah, right.
They could do it. The cost to conquer Spain was they estimated that 1 out of every 5 people living in Spain, that is to say the Romans, at the time that they were contemplating conquering and going after this particular area of gold, estimated they would have to have 1 out of every 5 citizens be of Roman birth.
Wow.
Yeah. The Chinese now, the Chinese population is very diverse ethnically, and even more so when you throw in the religious components. But at least 160 ethnic groups that are easily identified. It's not a homogeneous Han people throughout, as much as the Chinese used to want to portray that. So they've got their own internal problems, and the Chinese have a very tight control on their media, yet stuff still leaks out. The Chinese government is constantly running against battles where they're moving Han Chinese racial groupings into outlying areas, attempting to get basically to that 1-to-5 ratio where they'll have stability and still be able to impose order and control. And thus recently we've seen they've run counter to that trend, that they're run up against a counter trend, which is more Aquarian age, if you will, more decentralized, more local, more tribal. And they're getting big riots all over the place, and they're having some real fractures appear in the homogeneous face they would paint to the world.
So much for the Olympics, huh?
Well, it's a funny situation, because of course the Han are most in control, so Beijing and that area I would think would be quite safe. Yeah. That's not really the issues. They now have the other issues, of course, with bird flu, deteriorating power systems, ecology problems, et cetera, but...
Cliff, how would you, or what would you suggest? Let's say that some people would like to become self-sufficient, knowing some of the things that are going to happen. Number one, how do you think the best way people could become self-sufficient, could begin to rely more on their own resources and ability rather than relying and becoming totally dependent on the federal government or even the state government?
Well, you run into that level all over, and I'm not by any means an expert. I do live a certain, as George Ure says, light footprint manner. So I know a whole lot about being more independent from the grid, this kind of thing, have solar panels. For instance, I cook my dog's food in a solar oven today, as cooks my wife's dinner that way as well. So free energy, right? Let's say that we want to speak to the issues there. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, one thing to do would be to go and see George Ure's site. He's put a lot of thought into this. How to be independent, the economics involved, how to get yourself to the point where you can economically even consider it, etc. There's a great many ways, and it's very diverse, and it's going to depend on where you're at. For instance, you may decide that, well, you're going to start doing blueberry production on a quarter acre of land.
Yeah.
It's feasible to make money at it.
Oh, you betcha it is.
Okay, so that gets you started. You're industrious, you take that and you go. There are also other ways to start just where you're at. You've got a big, nice house, and unfortunately, you're about to hit a period of time, if you're in the East Coast and in certain other areas, where it may get extremely bitterly cold, because we may run into what Isaac Asimov called natural seasonal oscillation shortening, to where we would lose spring and fall, and we would have essentially summer and winter. And when it transited, it would be very cold and bitter. He saw this leading up to, as a natural part of what we now call global warming, leading up to a point where we would flop from one stage to the other and stay there with some stability for some period of time. And he, for a great many reasons, really hoped it would be an ice age, because it would give humanity a much better chance of survival as a species. And
with an ice age, as opposed to what kind of age?
As opposed to more of a tropical, as we might think of as a cetaceous sort of high carbon dioxide age, right? Because bear in mind, humans don't do well with oxygen removed.
Well, that's true, yeah.
If the evidence exists now that the tundra in Alaska is 1 degree away from warming to the point where it'll start releasing methane. The same is also true for an area the size of like Germany and France that's in Siberia. If that methane comes on out, as well as the methane hydrates that are in the Pacific Ocean alone, as to say nothing of the other parts of the planet, then we're looking at a situation where there may be one of two occurrences. Either a reduction of oxygen on a wholesale planet-wide level, such that we find it difficult to breathe at sea level, or a situation where we have tightly packed, more or less controlled by weather kinds of clouds that float around and kill everything they hover over.
Jeez. You know, you said several extremely interesting things. Number one, I just got some information tonight, as a matter of fact, that there are a lot of animals in the world, especially up here in our section of the world, that are preparing for winter. In other words, like you said, fall and spring are gone. We didn't have a spring this year, at least where I live. We are now, the weather at night and in the morning just seems like we're into fall already, and we're not even into September. We're still in August, and this was going on.
Are you north of 40?
No, well, I'm in just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Oh, okay.
So I'm south.
We're experiencing the same thing up here at a remarkable schism. It's very noticeable how sharp it went suddenly into fall-like weather.
Yes. So that supports exactly what you just said. I mean, my gosh, what is going on temperature-wise?
Well, let me go back to something else. Let's go back to the Webbot stuff here for a second, right?
Yeah.
And some of the warnings I've been given. I've sold software to a lot of people, and a little bit of background, and I sold some to some people that were in official, let's call them the peripheral space business within the government. I developed a relationship with them over time, and when they retired, one of them who moved up with a bunch of other guys into Colorado, in one of the NASA enclaves up there, told me earlier the year that he was told by his, this is one of those hearsay things, but it goes also back to what the bots were saying, that the neighborhood guys were all preparing to put away 30 and 40 cords of wood.
30 and 40 cords, my gosh.
They actually told him, consider it as though you'll be living in Maine, and we don't even think that 60 cords might be excessive. Now, these are people that have reliable, presumably, propane heat.
Yeah, right.
And also have fireplaces because you lose power and propane truck might not arrive and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I guess there's just been a flurry of wood cutting among this particular little group. What do they know? That's getting back to the NASA thing. What does NASA know that's not telling everybody?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, damn. That's, again, that fits in with what we just said about we're going into not only a winter, but we may be going into a cycle of winters that are much, much worse than